Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining today's SCORE Fairfield County live webinar, Are Any Technologies Safe Anymore? I'm Steve Smith, the webinar coordinator at SCORE and a business mentor here in Fairfield County, and I'll be your host. Our presenter today is Budley Freund. More about Bud in just a moment, but first a little bit about SCORE. I can see from the attendees list that some of you have been at our webinars before, and so you've heard this, so just bear with me. It'll just take a second, but I think it's important. SCORE is a national organization with about 320 offices throughout the country and over 10,000 volunteers. SCORE was started in the mid-'60s as a part of the Small Business Administration and is still, indeed, a part of the Small Business Administration. In Fairfield County, we have about 100 to 110 volunteers with various degrees of industry expertise, process knowledge, and subject matter experts on things like technology. And yes, that's what we're going to talk about today. In addition to these webinars, if you go to our website, you'll find all of this information there. And I'm going to tell you this URL probably 4 or 5 times, so here's the first time, fairfieldcounty.score.org. If you go to the website, you'll see that we offer these webinars twice a month, as well as a series of workshops throughout Fairfield County. The venues change, but they're usually local libraries. We do about 125 to 130 of these workshops, and they're live events and usually occur, and I do say usually, between 6:30 and 8:30 at night. Probably our flagship offering, though, is our one-on-one counseling and mentoring that we do at our offices on East Avenue. That's 111 East Avenue, to be specific, in Norwalk. And you are, of course, are at our website, which is fairfieldcounty.score.org. You can sign up for webinars, workshops, one-on-one counseling, all 3, 2 out of the 3. It's a smorgasbord of choices for you. The webinar series, as I said, we do 2 a month, and our next webinar is only in 1 week, September 5th, when the subject will be, and I think this is really an important one based on the clients that I've counseled in the last several years, does your personal budget support your business? Look for the specifics at fairfieldcounty.score.org, and in fact, you've already will have received an email message marketing that event and telling you the details of how to sign up. Okay, so today's webinar is going to end sharply at 1 o'clock. It is being recorded. I repeat, it is being recorded, and the recording will be available later in the day. That's usually the most often asked question. And again, of course, the recording will be available at fairfieldcounty.score.org. Now, the way this works is that Budley, the presenter, will present for probably 40 minutes, and then during that time, if you have questions, please log them in the chat room down in the left-hand corner of your screen, and I'll kind of moderate those Q's and A's for Budley, and we'll answer questions from 1:15 to 1 o'clock. At the conclusion of the webinar, you're going to receive an email asking you to evaluate the quality of the webinar. And we really appreciate your input on that, and we do use it for sure. Now our speaker is kind of a unique guy, because not only is he a presenter today and oftentimes a presenter at our workshops and webinars, but he is also, you guessed it, the technical support or technical background behind our webinar program. So he's wearing 2 hats today in this webinar. Bud makes computers do what they're supposed to do and stop doing what they shouldn't. That's kind of his mantra, and he's been doing it, teaching technology and providing tech to small businesses and even families who are looking for reasonable, cost-effective technology solutions, and he's been doing it for almost 20 years. As I said, he's not only a workshop presenter, but he's also a certified SCORE mentor and a guy who makes all these webinars work. So Budley, thanks, welcome. I'm going to turn it over to you. And as I said before, at the conclusion of his slides, we'll have a Q&A session, and please log your questions in the lower left-hand chat room. Okay, Budley, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you all for joining us. We've got a whole bunch of things to go over today, but before we dive into that, I'd like you to take a moment to think about the last time that you wanted to do something and a computer wouldn't let you. For instance, could you call the office back? They're working on the database. I can't schedule your appointment. Or you went to an ATM and you were trying to get some money out and the ATM was broken. Or you went over to a gas pump and you had to go in to pay instead of at the pump because the credit card machine wasn't working. In each of those cases, the momentary inconvenience that you experience as a consumer might result in a few choice four-letter words, and you go on complaining, you go somewhere else, you resolve the problem, you go about your business. However, as the business owner, you cannot let these machines stop your business from running. So, if you take nothing else away today, take a few moments to think about these 4 items here, which, let me get my little arrow, these 4 items here. And if your computer stopped working, how would you do that? By phone? Do you have a backup laptop? Do you have a tablet? Whatever it is, are you all online? Make sure you can keep your business running, and understand that Sony, when they were shut down 2 years ago, had absolutely no idea of what to do when they were confronted with the problem of their business having no computers to run. So you can get a leg up on a large corporation. Now, why is all of this stuff happening? And to skip over all of the very fancy technobabble, it's really simple. Computers talk to each other. That's all they do. There's a variety of different languages, there's a variety of different protocols, but the bottom line is computers are just talking to each other, and that's where we get good things happening and bad things happening. However, and I found this really interesting because it's the first time I have ever seen everybody in government in agreement about one item. It's not about the computers and what the computers do. It's about the people who are using the computers. And everything you're going to see following up on this is more about the people than the computers. So if there's one major takeaway about what technology is safe, I would suggest to you that virtually any technology is safe provided the user exercises extreme caution. And understand that things are getting so complex, and as Steve said, you'll be able to see all of these things and stop and pause when this is up online at fairfieldcounty.score.org. So as we move along through it, on this slide in particular, understand that these people who are supposed to be explaining technology to us, whether it's in a publication or somebody doing a presentation, they're starting to get confused because of this complexity. And these 4 companies down here, if you do some homework, you'll find out that each one of them in some fashion or another was providing either bogus or erroneous information, and it's happening more and more often. And it's happening in a variety of areas. So again, the first theme to go through, not only education, but if you're using an old computer or an old web browser, I'm going to say update until you are so annoyed of it you might want to hang up. But you've got to stay up to date on this stuff now. Industrial controls, I like to refer to it as the Internet of almost everything, and we'll cover a little bit more about that going on. There seem to be a number of enormous problems with the Internet of Things and people not changing the passwords on these devices. And understand that the cost of not doing this can reflect on your bottom line. So who's getting clipped? This is the really interesting part. It's people who firmly believe they know what they're doing. It's people on Macs. It's people on Android phones. I'm sorry, the statistics from this article indicate that it's people with advanced college degrees who know what they're doing, or people who are just plain too lazy to add in some other step to safeguard their data. And with Windows, if you're using a Windows computer, 12% are thinking it's just too much work for me to do all this security stuff. And hopefully by the end of this, you will understand that there is really valid reason to be doing the extra effort and not feeling tremendously overconfident. Again, just another piece to the puzzle. Deloitte can pretty much go out and hire whomever they want. This is a blue chip company that produced this fabulous glossy item, and they had the impact of what happens above the surface to your company, what happens below the surface of the company, and in this group think, you look through this list and you're not going to see education, and these are supposed to be the people who are making the recommendations to others. So let's start by talking about a variety of different operating systems, and I'll offer a few thoughts on which ones are either better or not as good. First of all, if you are using Windows, as the majority of the world is, please get up to Windows 10. It was a rebuild that does a large number of safeguards, provided you don't go clicking on things you shouldn't, and we'll talk about more of that later. Apple is currently up to Sierra. If you invest in Apple computers, they take really good care of their sandbox, and they are very careful to patrol things and update regularly. Ubuntu is Linux, which is a free operating system. I do the majority of my banking through a Ubuntu computer because the probability of Linux being hacked is considerably lower than the probability of Windows being hacked. It's a different language. The analogy I like to give is somebody who speaks Greek is talking to somebody who speaks Portuguese, and neither one of them understands what the other is saying. If you throw a virus at Windows, Ubuntu isn't going to understand it. Chromebooks built by Android, yes, that big long number is the current operating system version, and I'm a huge fan of my Chromebook. I've been using it on a very regular basis now and have had virtually no problems. Android, the phones, the tablets, the current operating system is called Nougat, and they are going to be doing the upgrade to Oreo. Unfortunately, I do a far better job of keeping track of numbers than names, but that's the way they want to work. iOS, the Apple mobile operating system, current version is 10.3.3. And when you get into the Internet of Things, General Electric is trying to produce a platform called Predix, which they are working very hard to get a language that all of these machines will talk to one another. And in each of the cases of these operating systems, the issue that you will eventually run into is the fact that the software can continue to update regularly. However, your hardware, unless you go out and spend more money for a new device, that doesn't update as much, and at some point in time, everybody starts to pull the plug on what the software, the new software, will work on and what devices it will not work on. And at some point in time, to keep yourself safe, you're going to want to invest in new hardware. It's like getting a new car after a while. It'll work, but after a while, you just need to make the investment. Now, another aspect of the software that's important to understand is that companies are trying to track information from you because they get advertising dollars and information which results in those ads you see on web pages and results in all those suggestions. And I told them I wanted to buy a pair of shoes, and Zappos will not leave me alone for 3 months until they figure out the shoes fit and it's fine, and they shouldn't be bothering me anymore. If you get a new Windows computer, take the time to configure it custom so that you can turn off a lot of these privacy settings. Otherwise, you are giving all of this information to Microsoft. Oh, those heinous people are doing that. Well, guess what? Google is doing it too, and so is Apple. Everybody's gathering the information. If you don't want Apple to have that information, turn off Spotlight. Spotlight tracks everything you do. Siri is also tracking everything you do. So a word to the wise, if you're trying to keep a low profile, and we'll go through reasons to do that, all of these places where people are pulling your information, you can turn them off. Now, if you want to start trying to manage the network either at your home or at your business, the place that you want to do it is going to be at this thing called the router. Now, bottom left corner picture, that's what the World's Fair thought your home computer was going to look like in 1960, and it's not too far off the mark. You got your monitor, you got your printer, you've got your steering wheel for your Formula One driver, you got your keyboard. You may need a house that's a little bit larger than you were anticipating, but hey, at least they had the idea down. For the computer that you've got, whether it's at your office or it's at your house, it's going to connect to this gizmo called a router, and we'll talk a little more about a router in just a moment. The router is then connected to this thing called a modem, which I like to compare to an ATM. You give Opt Online or Verizon money, and they will give you internet. You stop giving them money, and they stop giving you internet. But that's the device that gets you out to the world. But understand, again, in how information moves around the planet, if you are in America and you want to find out something about kangaroos in Australia, it's not a straight line between your computer and the computer that you're talking to in Australia. It is a series of hops, and it can travel in a variety of different directions. And that information, depending upon how each of these servers is set up, can also gather, accumulate, keep, and store the information and requests that you are sending. So, going back to the recurring theme, proceed with caution. Now, I want to talk about what's under the hood of the router. And every router will look different, and every router will configure differently, but they all have a common theme. You can set them up so that you can turn computers off and on at fixed times. Well, let me clarify that. You can allow a computer to get out to the internet between the hours of 9 a.m. and 5 p.m., or if you've got kids and you want them to be done with the internet at 8:30 at night, you can set that up in the router, and it's not negotiable. And that information is done under the hood in a web browser. Also, this information here is how you point that router to go out the door of the modem. I'm going to go out to the internet. This is going to send you out to the internet. It's going to send you to that door. Now, that door could be something like OpenDNS, which for home use is free and allows you to set up a whole slew of filters over what you would like people to go to, what you don't want people to go to. You can set up both in the router and at OpenDNS if you use that as your doorway to not have Facebook at your office. You can set it up so that people cannot go on to LinkedIn at the office. And it works very simply. you decide to type in whatever it is that you want to go to, and OpenDNS is going to tell you that you just cannot go there. Okay? And understand that routers will work for iPhones, iPads, Macintosh computers, Ubuntu computers. All of that can be managed from under the hood of the router. So it makes the router a very powerful management point as opposed to going computer by computer to try and do this setup. However, and I do far too much homework, a lot of these routers are not doing a particularly good job on the very high-end stuff because whatever manufacturer built it a while back, they're not keeping up. People do not do the firmware upgrades to the routers. Have I mentioned updating on a regular basis? This is part of what this study did not mention, but I can tell you is part of what the issue is. Regular updates are just critical. So, we all know about it. We all know that it can create all kinds of problems. All kinds of problems. It's amazing what people are putting out onto the internet. And by the way, this article up here was the Washington Post talking about not wanting to be in the New York Times. Well, I'm not sure you'd want to see this kind of stuff in the Washington Post either. But here's the important part to understand about email. So, come on. There we are. Okay. Washington Post article from 2013. We've been seeing Mr. Clapper showing up on a very regular basis these days. In 2013, 4 years ago, he was talking about the dangers of email and Gmail as the product that you use. Meanwhile, if you didn't do your homework or you didn't follow that, the Democratic Electoral Committee leader, John Podesta, was using a Gmail account to run the presidential campaign. And yes, the password for his Gmail account was, that's right, password. Now, I don't get it. All I can tell you is what I read in the newspaper. We will talk about something in a little bit called two-step verification. But again, if you're in a hurry and you've got to get to your email and two-step verification is not going to keep you safe, but you might think that if you are running a presidential campaign, that might have been a halfway good idea. For those of us in business, if you are using email to do your business, I strongly urge you to look into a paid service like Microsoft Hosted Exchange. You're going to have to pay for email, but it will provide a level of safety and security that you are not going to get from a free email service. And by the way, part of the issue I mentioned earlier was the lack of good information, and I would suggest to you, and I do a lot of headline reading, that we have editors who are not particularly familiar with the stuff that they need to edit. And this is a classic example. Email did nothing wrong. It worked exactly the way it's supposed to work. The people who used it didn't do a particularly good job, but email performed flawlessly. How flawlessly? Even the brightest guys in the room are getting fooled. And that's something that we all need to be conscious of. In my crystal ball, I will predict within a very short period of time, you are going to see corporations that are fearful of getting problems on their computer networks say, we are very happy to email out to your free email account, your Google account, your Live account, your Hotmail account, but we will not take in email that is coming from a free email service. The risk to our business is far too great. We'll send out to free. We are not going to take it in. It's just too dangerous to our computers. Now, I regularly say to people, security and safety is not a product, it's a process. It's being conscious of what to do and understand that the more security, the less freedom. The more freedom, the less security. However, if you have people in your company who you did not part with on very positive terms and they've got an axe to grind with you, you will want to proceed cautiously if you have given them the keys to the kingdom of your business. So read your emails very carefully, because in this case, which was coming supposedly from Microsoft, there's no Microsoft logo anywhere in this email, and if you clicked on this in a politically correct phrase, you would be screwed, number one. Number two, I got this email, and I know for a fact that FedEx does not need to use DentistElmhurstNY.com as their email service because they've got FedEx.com. Read where this stuff is coming from, because, again, that would be a really big problem. And a quick sidebar, just so you understand. If you get a phone call or an email from the IRS, you can pretty much either hang up, laugh at them, or throw it in the trash. The only way the IRS will communicate with you is by snail mail. I've heard this from a number of different accountants. Now, why would I send to myself a hacked note? And I'm not going to unsubscribe from nothing. So, again, this is stuff where you've got to read what's coming through your door. Why would I send myself a notification that I paid myself? Don't click on these things. It's a really bad idea. Proceed with caution. This one, if you can figure this out, I urge you to send Ms. Janice Dawson the money. Let me walk you through this very quickly. She's from Trinidad and Tobago, just off the coast of South America. She's writing from the hospital in the Ivory Coast, which is in Africa, because her stepmother is trying to poison her and take everything. However, the part I don't understand is that her email, her yahoo.co.jp email, is coming out of Japan. Where is this woman? And if you can figure it out, you send her the money. Otherwise, laugh and throw it in the garbage. Also, understand that it has gotten to a point in time now where it is really, really important to start to keep a lower profile. Because if you have people working at the DOD who are Washington Senators fans, and somebody does their homework to find out that Steve works at the Department of Defense, and I can figure out Steve's email, and I send Steve the note that says discounted Washington Senators tickets, and he thinks that's a really good idea, I may have just opened a door, and that can create a problem. So, moving on. Go ahead. Question, Steve?
Yeah, no, by the way, you're working so hard there. I thought I'd just give you an opportunity to catch your breath and ask two questions. So Karen asks, I did the open DNS, but the electricity went off. She must be in Ivory Coast, and it no longer worked. Did I do something wrong? Does that work for you? Do you understand what she's saying?
Yes. Karen, my suggestion is the following. If you have done the DNS settings in your router, go back into your router to check on those settings. You may need to reset your router and start over. That would be the OpenDNS hasn't gone away. It's still part of the Internet, so you may just need to do those resets inside of the router you've got, or if something got, for lack of a better phrase, fried in your router, they're about a $100 item. I would recommend investing in it. I would recommend keeping it up to date with firmware.
Yeah, one more here from Andrea, and Karen says, thank you, so I'll say you're welcome. Andrea asks, so how do you update a router when provided by a service provider like Verizon?
Step one, Andrea, would be to call Verizon. I do banking online because the responsibility for my documents lives with the bank. In the case of Verizon providing you with a router, the responsibility for the router updates and upgrades lies with Verizon. So, and Verizon's 800 tech support number, their people, to their credit, are really, really good. I would rather talk to Verizon by phone to order a new mobile device than to walk into a Verizon store.
Thank you very much. Budley, I'm going to take one more question at this point, and then we're going to go back to your slides. This is from Veta, and she says, I have AT&T UVerse. I have a modem, but I don't see a separate router. I guess she would then say, what do I do?
Two thoughts. Number one, call AT&T, ask them if it is built into the device. There is a very high level of probability that it is. In your conversation, the other magic word is to say, does the AT&T UVerse router have a firewall? Very important word to hear them say yes. If it does not, splurge and get a router of your own for $100, and again, AT&T can help you walk through the process of turning off what might be inside of the AT&T device and having it pass through. That's the magic words again. Pass through to the router that you would have purchased on your own.
Okay, great, Budley. Now back to online strategies, but just let me remind everyone on the call, as the previous folks have done, just put your question down there in the chat room, and we'll make sure Budley gets to them. So, Budley, back to you. Online strategies, go.
All righty. And as you can see, you're going to hear things over and over and over. But let's start here. Those of you who remember Hill Street Blues and Sergeant Phil Esterhaus will remember that the phrase was, let's be careful out there. So, as an overall theme, don't do your banking at Starbucks or do your banking at the library or do your banking at Dunkin' Donuts. You don't want to put personal stuff onto public networks if you can avoid it. And as an example of the personal stuff on public networks, this was an article. It's been in Forbes. It was in the New York Times as well as the Wall Street Journal. People are dealing in a virtual currency called Bitcoin, and to kind of puff themselves up, they were talking about how they are dealing in Bitcoins on their Facebook pages. I don't tell anybody who I bank with or where I bank or what's in my bank account. And here are people who are talking about the Bitcoin currencies that they're working in on public media. Then what happens is somebody gets their phone number, calls up an AT&T or a Verizon, impersonates this master of the universe dealing in commerce and says, oh my goodness, my phone dropped in the toilet, my mother is going in for cancer, I've got to get the phone number transferred to my old phone, can you switch it over? And somebody is gullible enough to do it, and the next thing you know, this guy who was advertising how he was doing business through his phone, in commerce, online, loses his phone, and in one case, the guy lost $1 million. don't advertise this stuff on the public social media, folks. It's just not a good idea. And if you're traveling, it's probably not a good idea to be doing banking if you're at a hotel because, again, these are public networks. And what's going on is that people are throwing out more in the way of ransomware than viruses. Viruses don't create as much of a problem as I'm going to lock up your computer, and if you don't pay me, I'm not going to give you your information back. We will talk about this in detail. It's coming up. Why would you want to pay ransomware? Because if all of your business data is no longer accessible to you, you've got to get it back. Why do you have to get it back? Because people are going out of business over it. Slide will be coming up. 60% of businesses that get ransomed go out of business. The targeting of people who are trying to do business in commerce is now also coming through LinkedIn, which is owned by Microsoft. So understand, quick sidebar here, folks. If you go to LinkedIn and somebody wants to connect with you, unless you know who they are, you might not want to grow that network so quickly. It becomes rather dangerous. It's getting dangerous in the legal profession. DLA Piper is an international law firm. They were one of the 300,000 computers that got shut down by the WannaCry ransomware. They had attorneys working out of their home for a week or two while they rebuilt everything. In a separate item, the 200 law firms around the country were checked, and 80 out of 200 firms had no idea that they had been hacked. Proceed cautiously. Start to put up some protections. It's dangerous out there, folks. People are trying very hard, and I would say that while security is important, it's going to be the education and maybe not rushing through your emails as quickly as you possibly can. And again, why is education the important item? This comes out of a report from Verizon in 2017, earlier this year. Human error is the biggest problem. If you'd like to read the Verizon report, you can get it at this URL. Again, this whole presentation will be available online. You'll be able to get it at a much slower pace later on. But these are all of Verizon's recommendations of things to do to keep yourself safe online. However, Verizon was doing business with a company that left 14 million of their customers exposed through an Amazon Web Services connection. So you're only as strong as your weakest link. So here's Verizon talking about how to be safe, but the people they're doing business with, if they're still doing business with them, they're not doing as good a job as Verizon probably would like them to. Nor was Yahoo. And by the way, the sale price at Yahoo originally was $4.8 billion. And after this second $1 billion hack was revealed, the first one was $500 million. That was in 2013. That sale price for Verizon dropped another $250 million. This stuff is affecting people at the bottom line. Now, how would it affect you as a small business? Well, according to IBM, if you have a hack, the cost of remediation so that people can be checking their identity online through an Equifax or any of these other companies is approximately $158 per record. You want to do some quick math, at $158 per record with 1 billion users hacked, it's astonishing that Yahoo is still in business. So, proceed cautiously, folks. Button this stuff up. It's all about the users who are clicking on things. Here we are. This was the one I was looking for before. you get hacked, and there's a very high level of probability that you're not going to be in business, predominantly because people will lose their trust in you. And it's your business that they lose trust in. But the fact of the matter, going back 3 years now, this was a report from IBM. They looked at 1,200 hacks. 95% of those hacks were caused by some component of human error. Leaving a password out, not locking the computer, clicking on a bad link. It's about the people, folks. And again, another article, this was right after the WannaCry virus went out and Hitachi was caught. And Hitachi is laying claim that this article came out on a Friday. They said on Friday that by Monday they're going to be fully secure. Now, if IBM is claiming that 95% of the problem is people, are you telling me that between Friday and Monday, the 30,000 global employees of Hitachi are all going to be locked down solid? Don't believe everything you're reading in the papers. Proceed cautiously with this stuff. This is another interesting item to keep in mind about your employees. Reality Winner is the name of a person, okay, who had released this NSA memo because she was very upset about what was going on. How was she caught? All those dots, the federal government has set up their printers, their color printers, so that when you send a document from your computer to a printer at a government facility, in a corner somewhere that the people in the government know about, they are including these not particularly discernible dots that can be read by people who know to look for them, and those who are very busy to look at the text, they don't pay attention to this. But these dots right here, in this matrix over here, explain who sent that item, what day they sent it, what printer it came from, and that's how our government is trying to track the paper leaks that everybody's concerned about. You have employees in your company. How much access to how much of your data do they have, and do you want them to have? Which lead, of course, to where are you putting all of the things that you've got? And again, we'll go to a somewhat busy slide, but let me walk you through this very quickly, all right? I had a customer who lost 14 gigabytes of music, which is approximately 6,600 copies of the Beatles song Help, which if you bought it at iTunes would be approximately $8,500. I was able to recover 2 gigabytes out of the 14. That's about just shy of 1,000 copies. I was able to recoup about $1,200 worth of what they lost. So the total loss for this fellow was $7,300. Whereas if you spent $6 on a 16 gigabyte thumb drive and you did a drag and drop copy, you would have been able to back up all of this. I am a huge fan of the 3211 backup. Put your data in 3 different places, 2 different media, one of them off-site, one of them offline. 3 different places. Your computer, an online service like Mozy or Carbonite, and an external hard drive. 2 different media, a thumb drive, an external hard drive, one of them off-site, a Mozy or a Carbonite, one of them offline. This is where the work comes, folks. This is the Friday afternoon. Plug this thing in, do your backup, and before you leave the office, unplug it. Because if Sony had one offline computer when the whole world shut them down, they would have come in on Monday, they would have disconnected to the world, they'd have plugged in the offline computer and pushed everything back. So, one offline backup becomes really, really important. Back to the Internet of almost everything. If you don't change those passwords from password or administrator, people will get into your networks. So what makes a good password? Take a word, put in numbers instead of letters. You could use password, but they'd have to put bamboo slivers under your fingernails to figure out that that's how you spelled password. This is probably a little bit tedious, and if you have a cap H in the middle, you might forget it. Last item in the way of passwords, person, place, thing. Transpose it, and it's bulletproof. Write it down, but don't tape it to your monitor. That's a bad place to put it. Two-step authentication, very simple. Before somebody will let you through the door, they're going to send another notice for a code to your phone. And until you get the code, you can't get through the door. So here's Mr. Podesta. I type in password. Until Google sends me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I can't get through the door, and neither could anybody else. Password managers, I don't like them at all, particularly when the password manager company gets hacked themselves. I am a huge fan of creating a really stupid spreadsheet that you keep in your documents folder or on your desktop called birthdays or holiday gifts. And more importantly, just to keep that theme in mind, do not call that password spreadsheet the really, really top secret, very, very important file. Everybody will figure it out. And by the way, if you're using the fingerprint thing on your phone, understand that within 2 days of the 5S being released, people had already hacked through that door. So all this keeps circling back to proceed with caution, folks. And of course, now going back into the Internet of Things, watch out for the microwave spy cameras. They seem to be out there. I've never seen a camera in my microwave, but mine is slightly older. What do I know? And by the way, IBM, who was talking about the hacks and the $158 per record, decided somehow to make the oops of sending out the USB drive that got all of their customers infected. How does that happen? Well, somebody got a little sloppy along the way. Sorry it happens, but the other thing to understand is if you get that thumb drive, somebody can set up what's called an auto run file, and you plug it in and it goes to work. Or somebody in your office plugs it in and records the meeting. Or somebody plugs it in and it's providing a level of protection. Be cautious in what you get and where you get it from. And who you get it from. This is Disney's second visit to court on looking over people's shoulders to see where they're going and what they're doing. The last time they were in court, it cost them $3.5 million, which is not a lot of money to Disney in the overall scheme of things, but the notion that they didn't get the message the first time, they're back in court again looking at what other people are doing. By the way, if you're using Kaspersky, you might want to take a lead from the federal government and look for different software to put on your computer, because the government doesn't think it's a great idea. And the reason the government doesn't think it's a great idea is because in the Senate, at a vote of 98-2, and in the House at a vote of 419-3, we put laws in effect because people in our government saw without question that our electoral process was compromised by outside computer intervention. They saw stuff we haven't seen yet. They put stuff into law. All I can tell you, folks, proceed with caution. Keep a low profile. Don't use the same password everywhere you go. Think about who you're sharing these things with. Change the Internet of Things device passwords. And the other one that's really important is this. I don't recommend using a password manager. This was a list I found somewhere else. Two-step authentication, big fan of it. There are VPN pieces of software that you can add onto your computer or into your browsers. Nothing comes to mind offhand, but these are all really sound pieces of advice. Again, this will be available for you to look through once it goes up online at fairfieldcounty.score.org. Final thought, and I read pretty much anything this guy puts out because I've never seen anyone with more credentials after his name, and he really does know what he's talking about. We're moving this stuff at incredibly fast pace, and the people who are pushing this stuff out the door to us aren't really getting that great an idea of what it is that they're pushing out to us and what its effect will be over a long period of time. So again, the takeaways: proceed with caution and update constantly. What can I answer for you, folks?
Hey, Budley, great job. Thanks very much. Lots and lots of information here. Yes, please enter your questions down in the chat room. We have another question from Andrea Budley, and it's on the subject of VPN. She says, I heard on NPR that VPN providers are not all created equal. Any brand recommendations?
I've built a number of VPNs, and my personal preference for VPN creation is what's called point-to-point VPN. Linksys as a company will allow you to put a router at your home, allow you to put a router at your office, and you can create a VPN tunnel fairly easily between them. It's kind of like two Dixie cups and a string. My wife works for a financial firm, and they are using Cisco, which, first of all, it's VPN on steroids. Second of all, they pay a ridiculous amount of money for the maintenance of this thing. For those of us who are running small businesses, before you go into the neuroses of VPNs for your small business, point-to-point, very reasonably priced, fairly easy to do. But if you're a road warrior and constantly traveling, I don't have a great recommendation for you in that regard. But I would try as much as possible to not be pushing that proprietary information over public networks.
Okay, good advice. All right, well, see, we have a couple more minutes here. We're almost at 5 before 1. Looking for any other questions. And while you contemplate your questions, let me remind you that our next webinar is September. It's hard to say September, actually. I can't believe it's September already. September 5th, and the topic will be, does your personal budget support your business? As I said, that's very, very topical for all of our clients. So if there aren't any, oh, wait a minute, we're getting questions here. It always happens when you get ready to close the door, right? So Andrea has another question. She has a Mac, and how can I encrypt my email?
Unless you're sending incredibly confidential information, I really don't recommend encrypting email. I have dealt with a number of medical offices where HIPAA requires the transmitting of proprietary information. And I have spoken with an attorney specializing in this topic. He's located in New Haven. Name escapes me off the top of my head. what we agreed on, and this is a guy who's gone to school to do the homework, is the following. If you've got, quote unquote, confidential / proprietary information that needs to go from you to me, create a document and save it as a password-protected PDF file. Attach the password-protected PDF file to your email. Send the PDF email to me, and in a phone call, in a text message, in something other than the attached, you will find the password-protected PDF. Oh, and by the way, the password is happy birthday. Don't put the password in the email with the password-protected document. So in the easiest, most simplistic method, create a password-protected PDF, attach it to your email, and send it out. If you need to be in password-protected email, companies like Intermedia offer hosted exchange and enormously robust, expensive services that can safeguard you. Otherwise, for the small business that needs to send something every now and then, look for a less expensive method.
Thank you, Budley. Quick, two more questions actually here from Veta again for home computers. How often would you recommend changing passwords? And then she has a second part to it where she says, do you recommend shutting down and unplugging everything every night? I hope not, because I've never even considered it. Have a go at those two.
Okay. Passwords. You can look this up on the internet right now. The fellow in the federal government who basically wrote the book on what passwords should be and how often they should be changed, just printed within the last 2 weeks that he really offered up some rather poor ideas, and in his opinion, you should change your passwords when you need to. At my wife's company, I believe they are changing passwords, again, a financial services company, and I believe she's on a 3 to 6 month, they just force feed it to her. How often should you change your password as a small business? If you're not giving it to anybody, there should be no need to change it. If your business, if your email, if your whatever is compromised, change it immediately. But if you're not handing it over to anybody, don't change it unless you absolutely have to. As for the turn your computer off at the end of the day versus leaving it on all the time, I leave my stuff on all the time. I upgrade the firmware of my firewall on a regular basis. I'm not neurotic about it, and I do every now and then run scans through my computer to be sure that nobody's poking and prodding at me. I am in Windows 10. I use Malwarebytes, and I also use a program called Super Anti-Spyware, both of which offer free versions. If you're concerned, a very simple unplugging the router from the modem disconnects the whole world from you. So those would be the simple steps. The getting into the complex, if you can avoid it, don't go there.
Okay, that's good. So unplugging the electric cord is a pretty worthless thing to do, I would think. But I may be wrong on that, so disregard it. Last question from Kyle McGinnis. Do you think it's possible to find a small, say, marketing company that could, for an affordable monthly charge, serve as a proxy face for her business, I guess, in the face of this growing weaponization of the internet? That's a very interesting question.
I'm not sure why you would want to do that or what you would want to accomplish by that. So I'm kind of at a loss as to where to go or what to do.
Well, let me. I think it might mean to kind of like transfer the. Kyle, jump in and stop me here if I'm going to say this wrong, but to transfer the risk to them.
If the issue is the assumption of risk, who's going to have to worry about my stuff? I would recommend that you look into something like Amazon Web Services or an eBay store where you set up shop on their computers and their stuff, because if you are doing the hosting for financial transactions online, having been through the process myself, if you want to engage a credit card company, you are going to have to go through a ridiculous number of hoops and forms that you've got to fill out, and you're going to do it on a recurring basis. So if you're looking to mitigate risk, look to putting your storefront on an Amazon Web Services or onto an eBay store. That would be the two places. And talk to people at either of those locations. They have people. You may have to do some digging to get to a human, but they'll tell you what the security and the credit card transfer aspects are.
Okay, good answer, as usual. All right, we're right at the top of the hour. I love it when a plan comes together like this. I'd like to thank everybody for attending today's live webinar, and a big thanks, of course, to Budley for presenting. And a reminder to everybody out there, and this will be my fifth time saying it, go to fairfieldcounty.score.org so you can get a full menu of the services that we offer. And, hey, everybody, have a nice day. Thank you very much for attending.